that Google include with it, especially as they sometimes change them when they release a new version. Now, I try to keep the course up to date, but with new versions of Android Studio coming out every few months, there will be times when it looks a little bit different to how it appears in these videos. So I'm going to create a couple of new projects using some of the templates that are currently shipping with Android Studio and show off some of the ways that they differ from each other. Now remember that these are just templates though. They're provided to save you having to type in some of the basic code that projects need, but there's no reason why you can't change any of the code that the templates create. If you use a template that includes a menu, for example, but decide that you don't want to provide a menu in your project, then you can just delete the menu code. And if you've used a word processing program such as LibreOffice or Microsoft Word, then you may be familiar with the concept of templates, and these are really no different. Alright, so let's have a look at the templates, and I'm going to start by creating a new project. Now, if you're watching this video in the Kotlin course, make sure that the Include Kotlin support box is ticked. That's the default, and probably already will be ticked. So I'm going to start off anyway and click on Start a New Android Studio Project. And we can see this button that I'm talking about down here, Include Kotlin Support. So again, that's the default. It probably is already clicked, and if you're in the Kotlin course, make sure that is clicked. But if you're watching this video in the Java course, you need to untick that box. Leaving it ticked will cause Android Studio to generate Kotlin rather than Java code. Now, I'll mention that each time we create a new project, at least for the first few projects, so that you generate the correct code for the language you're using. Now, I'm going to untick the box, and that's because Java programmers don't need to know anything about Kotlin, but Kotlin programmers will need basic familiarity with Java. So whenever a video shows code in both courses, I'm going to show the Java code. Don't worry though, if we need to write any code at all, there'll be separate videos for each course. So in the Kotlin course, keep that box ticked, then you can compare the Kotlin code on your screen with the Java code that's going to appear on mine. So leave everything else on this screen. As I said, for this particular application, I'm doing something a little bit different, and I'm including, and I've unchecked the box. I'm going to click on Next. I'll leave everything else as it is, and on this next screen, we're going to leave everything else as it is as well. Now, we're going to be explaining these screens in the next video, but for now, I just want to focus on the templates. So I'm going to click on Next. Now, at the time I'm recording this, Android Studio ships with 13 templates, and the images on this selection screen try to give you an indication of what they contain. Now, add no activity. This one here is the most basic, but I generally don't use that for most apps because we normally need at least one activity. Now, I'm not going to go through describing all the templates because a lot of the explanation won't make much sense just yet anyway. And in fact, you may be wondering what this activity that I've just mentioned is, but don't worry, I'll be explaining all that next. Now, once you're comfortable with Android Studio and you've worked through a few of the apps in this course, by all means have a go at creating projects based on each of these templates to get a feel for what they provide. For now, the only ones we really need to use are the basic activity and the empty activity. So basic and empty. Now, you can see from these images that basic activity contains a little bit more than the empty activity template. You can see the icon for the drop-down menu at the top right, and it also has a floating action button, this little yellow button at the bottom right. So if your app will include a menu or floating action button or both, then you'd probably be best off starting with the basic activity template. But if you don't want either of those, then use the empty activity template instead. But what if you want a menu but not a floating action button? Well, in that case, you can either start with an empty activity and add the menu code, or, and this is probably easier, start with a basic activity and delete the code for the floating action button. So I'm going to start by choosing this empty activity over here so that we can see what that provides. Now, on the next screen, as I click that, I'm going to leave everything as it is and accept the default values. So we'll see this activity name and layout name used in a minute. So just remember that they're called main activity and activity underscore main, and click on finish. Now, Android Studio takes a little while to create the project. Then you should end up with something that will look a little bit like this once this is finished. So I'll just fast forward this. Alright, so you should end up seeing something that looks a little bit similar to this. Now, the version of Android Studio that I'm using to record this video starts off in what's called Android View after creating a new project. And you can see this Android tab up here in the top left-hand corner, and Android was the default mode that's been selected. Now, some people prefer to work in Project View, but it really doesn't matter which one you use. We can switch to Project View by clicking Project, and then we can expand the list selection of folders and expand the details out of our application. Now some of the other views won't show most of the files we need, so I won't be using them in this course. Now the app that we've created is called My Application. Well, it's actually called My Application 2, and that's because I already created one previously called My Application. And I expanded that view and you saw that there was this app folder. I can expand that, click that open, and this is where most of the files we're interested in are located. Now in Android view, we switch back to that. The app folder is at the top level, this one here, and I can expand that out. And this is why many people prefer to work in that view. More files are visible in project view, but most of them are the ones that you don't generally need to worry about. The main files we have to change or create are in this Java or res folders, or we can switch back to project view. We can expand that out. We've still got the source, main, we've got the Java and res folders here. They're just a little bit in a slightly different location when in project view compared to Android view. So it's the same set of files essentially, just presented in a different way. So choose whichever view you're most comfortable with. I'll be mainly using the Android view in this course. Now over on the right hand pane up here, there's two files open. activity_main.xml and mainActivity.java. Now these are the names of the activity and the layout from the earlier screen. Now if we close these, we can open them up by just opening the particular folder. In the case of the Java folder, we can double click main activity to open them up, and the activity_main, we can look at the layout folder and double click that and open it up like that. And again, going back to Android view, we can see essentially the same thing. Opening up and we can see that our main activity file was there, and then in the res folder and the layout folder, there's our activity_main.xml. Now the activity_main.xml defines what the screen for the activity will look like. And if I go into this design tab, which is selected currently anyway, you can see that it looks very similar to the template image. There's no menu icon showing and no floating action button, just the text hello world, as you can see there. Now main activity also doesn't contain very much. If we have a look at that, don't worry about what any of this code means at the moment. I'm just showing you what the templates look like so you don't get stuck when Google changes them again in the future. And also don't worry that this is Java code if you're watching this in the Kotlin version of the course. Anything we do with the screen layouts is the same regardless of the language used, so some of the videos are the same for both courses. Now we can see that we've got a class here called main activity, and that's got a single method called onCreate. So class name, method name. Make a mental note of that, and then we'll see how the next template differs. So what I'm going to do now though is end the video, and in the next video menu and selecting close project. And what we're going to do is create another project, this time based on that other template, the basic activity template. So I'm going to click on Start a New Android Studio Project. So once again, I'm going to accept all the default values for everything and untick the Include Kotlin Support box. But if you're using Kotlin, this time keep it ticked. So we're going to click on that checkbox now so that you can see the difference. So click on Next, then we're going to go to Next again. And then this time we're going to choose the basic activity. Once we've done that, we're going to click Next. So once we get here, we get to name the activity and layout, but notice there's a couple of extra options compared to the last video when we used the empty activity. The title will be shown on the toolbar that this template adds to the project, but note that the activity name and layout name are the same as for the empty activity template. So I'm going to click on Finish at this point, and once again Android Studio should create a basic project based on the template we selected. Now, by the way, while it's building the project, it's not uncommon to see errors on the screen, but they should clear when everything's finished. So just keep an eye down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the status bar and don't try to do anything with the project until it's finished. It'll say something like Gradle build finished in, or words to that effect once it's finished, and how long it took when it's done. You can see down here at the moment it says Gradle build running. And you can see down the bottom left-hand corner it's Gradle build finished, and we're good to go. Now, by the way, you may also see a message at the top of the screen about Gradle files having changed. This happens from time to time with some Android Studio versions, so if you do see that, click the Sync Now button link at the right-hand side as you can see on the screen there. When Android Studio is finished creating the project, you should see main activity and a layout called content_main.xml. We can see them both on the screen up here. Now the layout looks very similar to our empty activity layout from the last video, but there's also a floating action button down here so we can see at the bottom right. Now, if you're feeling cheated because the image promised you a menu, don't worry, it's there, but it doesn't appear on this layout. Now, one difference between this template and the empty activity one is that Google splits the layouts for each activity up into two different files. Content_main.xml here is the one that we'd be using to put our own widgets into, things like buttons and text boxes and anything else that we want displayed on the screen. And the floating action button live in another file called activity_main.xml. You notice over here we've got that file, so we'll double click that to open it. So you can see that the toolbar and the floating action button can be selected when I click on them. So I can click on something and notice that when I'm doing that, it's selected. But if I go back to content_main.xml, I can't click the floating action button. And that's because they don't exist in this file, although Android Studio does display the floating action button in the preview. Now, as I click on the toolbar and the floating action button back in activity_main, notice how they're selected over the far left of the screen over here in the component tree. And when I click on the main part of the screen here, it selects the include line, which is including the layout called content_main. And you can see that over here to the right hand side. And this is called the attributes pane. So the idea is that the layout is split up to keep your widgets in a separate file from the toolbar and the floating action button. And if you wanted to, you could delete the include line and place all your widgets in here, but it's less confusing to keep them separate. Now, Google introduced this separation back in Android Studio 1.5, and that caused students at the time some confusion when they suddenly found two layout files in their projects. Now, it's possible that content_main may disappear from the template in a future version, but now that you know that content_main is just included in activity_main and that you don't have to keep your widgets separate if you don't want to, you shouldn't have any problems if things do change. And incidentally, in this version of Android Studio, the toolbar's blank even when previewing activity_main, and that does sometimes happen, but if I run the app, the toolbar would appear. So if you get a blank toolbar in preview mode, don't worry about it, it will show up when the app is run. Alright, now before I finish talking about templates, let's have a quick look at the main activity file. Now there's quite a bit more code in this version than in the empty activity template from the previous video, but it's all to do with the setting up of the floating action button and the toolbar. Now there's two methods or functions, if you were looking at this in the Kotlin course, that weren't present before, on create options menu and on options item selected. Now they're used to set up the menu and detect which menu items tapped. Also, there's code in on create to cause the toolbar to be drawn and to allow clicks on the floating action button to be detected. Now, if I don't want all that, I can just delete it. Now in the onCreate method, I'm going to go into there. I'm going to actually delete all but the first two lines. So everything from here down to the end of the right curly brace there, I'm going to delete, like so. And then I'm going to delete entirely the onCreate options menu function and also the on options items selected. So once I do that, we basically end up with the same code as the previous template would have given us. And by the way, I can also delete activity_main. I can come over here, right click and select delete. I can go ahead and ignore those warnings. Click on delete anyway. And that's removed activity_main from this project. And then what I could do is rename content_main to activity_main. I can come over here and right click that, click on refactor and select rename and change that to activity_main.xml and click on refactor. Now sometimes you might get an error doing that on a Mac or a Windows machine. And if that happens, just right click and choose copy. So if the rename didn't go through, just right click and select copy for the content_main XML file and select copy and paste and then choose activity_main as the file name, and then you'll be able to delete content_main. But in this case, you can see that the rename worked okay. So now that I've done that, notice over here there's this exclamation mark. And if you click on that to show it, we've got an error down here. We can scroll it up to have a bit of a look at it. And it's just basically a warning about the fact that the surrounding layout did not actually include this layout. Basically it's saying it's no longer shown inside another layout, but we don't need to worry about that at this stage. And what we can do instead is come over here to the text tab, and by clicking on that we can see the XML for the layout. Now you don't need to worry about this XML very often, although it's very helpful if you select it and paste it all into your question if you have a problem with a layout not working. What we can do to remove the error is delete the tools show in line, this line up here. which is what Android Studio is essentially suggesting that we actually do. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, delete it, making sure that I leave the last greater than sign there, and put that back in like so. And if we go back and click on the Design tab now, you'll notice that the error is not highlighted anymore. We haven't got a red exclamation mark anymore. So we created a project using the basic activity template, but then we changed it to be exactly the same as the one created with the empty activity template. Now, I don't expect you to remember all of that, nor be able to do it yourself just yet, but by the time you finish the course, all of what we've done will make sense. So that's templates. They're just templates generating common code to save you having to type it, but there's nothing magical about them. You're completely free to make any change you want to once Android Studio has created the project from the template. Now, if Android Studio changes in the future and templates with these exact names are no longer available, you just want to choose ones that look similar. And you can always delete any code that doesn't appear in the videos or add any code that I have in the video. Start your Android Studio application. And if you're on a Mac, you can go into the Applications folder to do that and double-click Android Studio. And if you're on a Windows machine, you can just go into the Start menu and type Android and click the icon when it appears. Now on Linux, you can use the technique I showed you in that video to access the Android Studio desktop entry that we created. So once you've started Android Studio, we're going to create our first application by clicking on Start a new Android Studio project. Now once you do that, a series of screens will appear to ask you for some basic information about the project you want to create. Now the first screen asks you for the application name, and we're going to keep it simple and call our first application Hello World. Now the next part is what might be a bit confusing, the company domain. So Android applications use the concept of a package name to make sure that your application reference is unique across the world. Now that's a Java convention, but it's used for all sorts of other things as well. The internet couldn't function if domain names weren't unique worldwide. Now the reason that it needs to be unique is when you eventually go to upload your code to the Google Play Store to make it available for sale, you need to have a unique identifier that's not used by anyone else. So what Google suggests you do is type your company domain name. So in my case, I'm going to use my domain name, which is learnprogramming.academy. If I delete this and type it in again, as I'm typing it, down the bottom, the package name is getting updated, learnprogramming.academy. Now Android Studio uses this reverse domain name to create the package. So I typed in learnprogramming.academy, but it came back and said academy.learnprogramming.helloworld. Now the hello world, by the way, was a representation of what I typed in the application name field at the top, minus spaces and all in lowercase. Now, if you haven't got your own domain name, that's okay. For training and testing purposes, there's a set of example domains that have been set aside for people to use. Example.com and example.org are two of these example domains. So you could just use example.org and it'll produce the package name org.example.helloworld for you. And if you want more information, you can visit example.org or example.com in a browser, and there's a link you can actually click when you get there for more information. So you can literally have anything there, but just do note that once you're creating your own applications and you're at the stage of uploading them to the App Store, then you need to have a domain name, so you should really make that unique. So at the moment though, I'm going to go ahead and use mine, which I'll be using through this course, learnprogramming.academy. So next you need to define the location where you're going to start saving your projects. Now this is just like a word processing document in the sense that you need to choose somewhere to save them. I've already got my location set out. In this case, I'm putting them in my desktop in a folder called Android O Kotlin, but you can just choose any location by coming over here and clicking on the three dots, the ellipsis, and selecting a folder to store all your Android programs in. And note that when you do that and choose a location, at the end, Android Studio will helpfully add Hello World, and that will actually be a subfolder containing our application. So in other words, it's creating a subfolder a subfolder of the Android O Kotlin folder that will ultimately contain this Hello World project. And as you create lots of projects, as you move through this course, there's going to be one subfolder for each of those projects. And that's so that they're neatly separated and you're not running any risk of actually getting into difficulties in some way by overwriting code. So make sure you don't try to put two projects in the same folder, as that's going to cause all sorts of problems. Now there's another important setting here we need to make on the screen. So make sure you tick the Include Kotlin Support box. That causes Android Studio to generate Kotlin code rather than Java code. Now this is the Kotlin version of the course, so we definitely want Kotlin here. It is possible, by the way, to mix Kotlin and Java in the same project, But for our purposes, we want Kotlin to be the default. So make sure that box is ticked before clicking next, and you can see in my case that is. Now this next screen can be a little bit intimidating, at least the first few times you see it. You might be thinking, what's all this about? Well, firstly, before I start talking about minimal SDK, these things here, the Wear TV, Android Auto, Android Things, they'll normally be unticked. Now, Wear is Android functionality to run Android applications on things like watches and so forth. In other words, wearable devices. Now, the next one, TV, is for Android TV so that you can create applications that work with Android TV. And that's the TVs that are running the Android TV operating system. Android Auto, well, that's actually for cars, automobiles, literally. Again, it's a special version that runs on that so you can create applications for cars. And last but by no means least, Android Things enables you to create apps for IoT devices. Now, we aren't going to be targeting any of those in this course because to actually do them justice, we would need to create a course in their own right for them. So you're going to be leaving all these disabled for this course. But the important thing on this screen is this minimum SDK. It talks about here at the top. So what is that? Well, SDK stands for Software Development Kit, which is the version of the Android software of the Android operating system, the minimum version that your application is going to run on. Now, when we drop down the list, we go all the way back to Android. We can go all the way back to Android 4 if we wanted to. Literally up here, API 14, Android 4, ice cream sandwich. That's API 14. Now, Google are no longer supporting older Android versions, so that's the earliest version we can choose here. Now, by monitoring the devices that connect to the Play Store, Google can track which versions of Android are still being used. And they've worked out that there really aren't many devices, if any, still running versions of Android before API 14. Now, that's great if you want to fully support everything, but by adding support for all versions of the Android operating system going right back to version 4, we're limited to some of the functionality we can use. And that's because as new versions of the Android operating system have come out, Google have updated it and improved it and added a lot of features. So consequently, it's generally not recommended to go back and say that you're going to support that minimum version. So it is a bit of a trade-off between the percentage of people who can access an older version and the functionality that you want to have in your application. Now, as a general rule, I'd suggest that you set your minimum version to target Android 4.2. This is API 17, which is Jelly Bean. Now, when you select each version, the display updates to show the percentage of devices that your app will work on. You can see here that API 17 and higher will include 96% of devices that are active in the Google Play Store. Now that number will increase as older versions are updated or replaced, but at the time I'm recording this, 96% of all Android devices active today are using Android 4.2, Jelly Bean, or later. Now there's a reason I suggest API 17, and that's because support for right-to-left languages was included in that version. So you could target an earlier API, and if you've got an API 16 phone that you want to use, for example, then it probably would make sense to choose API 16 instead. But I'm comfortable saying that you should use API 17. But I'll also be showing you how to change that if you change your mind and decide to support an earlier version. We'll see how to do that in a later video. But by choosing API 17 here, anyone who's running an Android version going right back to Android API 17 or higher will be able to run the applications you create, and that again is 96% of users. If they're running an older version, they won't be able to download and run the application. And incidentally, the ability to set a minimum SDK is why you don't have to install all those older Android versions when we were configuring Android in the SDK manager. So I'm going to talk a bit more about compatibility later, but you can see the older SDK levels are available even though we didn't install all the previous versions. Alright, so selecting API 17, I'm going to click on Next. We then get to the template screens that we've discussed in this section of the course. Now, these are the various types of projects that you can create by default with Android Studio, and as previously mentioned, it'll automatically add code and layouts for you depending on which one you choose. Now, once again, if the exact template isn't available because perhaps Google have changed things by the time you're watching this video, no need to worry. So I'm going to use empty activity here, which is selected for me currently. So just choose the one that's closest in appearance if empty activity isn't available or the name's changed. So do that and click on Next. And finally, just before Android Studio creates the project and generates the code for us, it's asking for the name of the activity and layout. Now, I am going to be talking about activities and layouts a bit later, but for now we can just accept the default names that Android Studio is suggesting. And we've already seen how both of these names are used in the previous videos in this section. So the suggested names are fine and quite descriptive, so we're actually going to go with those. So there's also a couple of checkboxes, and normally you'd leave these both checked. This first one, generate layout file, that causes Android Studio to create a default layout file for the project. That's the activity_main layout. Now most apps you create would need at least one layout, or they wouldn't be able to display anything, so you may as well get Android Studio to create the file for you. Now if you're creating an app that will run as a service and would have no user interface, then you could untick that box. And the second checkbox, it's a good idea to keep checked. That's the backwards compatibility checkbox. If you untick it, your app will only run on the latest version of Android. Well, I guess that's not strictly true because you can change the specific version, but you'll be targeting a single version of Android and the app won't work on earlier versions. And we're going to be talking about app compat in detail later, so for now please just take my word for it and leave that box ticked and then click on finish. And you saw that the progress was updated as Android Studio created the project, and it took a bit of time. And down the bottom left-hand corner, it says "Greater build finished in 2 seconds," and you can see we've now got this project showing on the screen. It does take a while the first time you create an Android project in Android Studio, but the next time you open that project, it should be a lot quicker. And just a reminder not to try and do too much until it's finished building the project. Expanding the directories in the project pane is okay, but editing code or changing layouts isn't a good idea until you see that build finished in the bottom left-hand corner. Now by default, you'll see a tip of the day dialog. I've already disabled it on mine, but we can go in here and have a look. Tip of the day. So by default, you'll see this tip of the day dialog pop up, and that can be interesting. It shows interesting features in Android Studio that can make you more productive. And until you've used Android Studio a bit, it probably won't make a lot of sense though. So I suggest just closing it when Android Studio starts until you've got more experience with Android Studio. The tips can help you become more productive once they start making sense. Now if you want, you can stop it appearing, which I've done, by unchecking the show tips on startup checkbox over here. But in this case, I'm just going to close it. If you have done that and you want to see it again, go to the help menu and you can select tip of the day here to bring it back up. Alright, so that's finished now, and we've now got some things that have come up on the screen. Sometimes you'll see a message that Gradle files have changed, in which case just click on this Sync Now button at the top right hand side of the screen, and that should clear the message and Gradle will build the project again. And if you're wondering what Gradle is, it's an open source build automation system. So it basically pulls together all the bits of the project to create the application file that can be installed on an Android device. Now if you use external libraries such as the YouTube API that we'll be using in a later section of the course, then you can tell Gradle about that and it sorts everything out for you. So you don't really need to know more about that at this stage because Android Studio runs Gradle for you,